So antimicrobial resistance, I call it the silent pandemic. And to tackle this challenging and very complex public health problem, we really need to attract the best and the brightest. Today, we're going to have a special podcast, which I call sort of a research careers in antimicrobial resistance, where we are going to interview some trainees and some very bright trainees that will discuss the pathways to work on this field. And those are going to be the next generation of outstanding researchers in the field. They are all participants of T32 programs around the country that are specializing in antimicrobial resistance. Welcome to Editors in Conversations. The objectives of this podcast is to discuss the different pathways to follow careers in antimicrobial research, comment on the challenges to follow an academic and research pathways, and provide future perspectives and guidance for early stage investigators who want to pursue research on antimicrobial resistance. On that note, I want to make a pitch for our next Texas Medical Center Conference of Antimicrobial Resistance and Stewardship, which is going to be held between January 18 and 20th of 2023. And in that conference, apart from awesome speakers, we also have mentoring breakfast, the 3 days directed to different populations, including the first one for women in science. So this episode is brought to you by Antimicrobial Agents and Chemotherapy Journal, available at aac.asm.org. I'm your host, Cesar Arias, Editor-in-Chief of AAC, and this podcast is supported by American Society of Microbiology, which publishes AAC. If you plan to publish in AAC members, ASM members get up to 50% off on publishing fees. So this is a great journal, one of the best in the field. Visit aasm.org/membership to sign up. And don't forget to check our latest issue of AAC, available at aac.asm.org, with outstanding papers on mechanism of resistance, clinical microbiology, pharmacology of antimicrobial agents, epidemiology, and others. I also want to make a pitch for our sister podcast with Dr. Alex McAdam and Ellie Teal from in the Journal of Clinical Microbiology. These are also great podcasts that are interrelated. Today, I have very special guests, which is our next generation of researchers in antimicrobial resistance. So I'm going to start with Cheyenne Lee. So why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Cheyenne Lee. As was said, I'm a fourth-year graduate student in Shauna McBride's lab at Emory University, and I work on C. difficile. I don't know if there's anything else that you guys wanted, but yeah.
Which is she's part of the program initiative for maximizing student development, and it's a graduate student representative of Emory University and T32 predoctoral fellow. Edwin?
Hi, thanks for having me. So my name is Edwin Chen. I am currently a postdoc in Matt Silva's lab here at University of Pittsburgh. I also completed my infectious disease fellowship here. So I am on this track for a physician scientist.
So he's one of our physician scientists of the day at the University of Pittsburgh, also in the T32 of antimicrobial resistance there. And then Kara.
Hi, so I'm Kara Hood, and I'm a postdoc, and I work in Cesar's lab at Houston Methodist Research Institute, and I'm in the T32 program in the Texas Medical Center training program in antimicrobial resistance.
Fantastic. Welcome to the program. So I want to start to ask you, each of you, your experience and how do you end up working on this field, and what sort of things attracted you to come to work on this field? Let's start with Cheyenne, who is a PhD student, and she has all her career in front of her.
Yeah, okay. So obviously it all started in undergrad. So I went to the University of North Carolina at Pembroke, so it's kind of a small liberal arts college. And whenever I was there, I got really involved in undergraduate research at the university. And I ended up joining the NIH RISE, so that's Research Initiative for Scientific Enhancement, and the NSF Compass programs. And both of these programs kind of exposed me to different careers in sciences, but I really enjoy doing the research. And specifically, I was looking at how Lumbee herbal tea, so Lumbee Nation is a tribe in North Carolina, a Native American tribe, and we were looking at how these medicinal teas impacted the growth of different organisms and how they could be used as medicines. So doing that got me really excited about continuing research, and I did some summer REUs and applied to school and kind of got where I am now.
Great. So, and tell me, how did you end up in this lab? What sort of things attracted you to work on this lab?
Yeah, so this lab specifically is I work on C. diff. So Clostridioides difficile, or C. diff, is an anaerobic pathogen that usually infects people that have already taken antibiotics. So whenever your microbiome gets thrown off. So it's really important for antimicrobial work because it's considered an urgent threat. As long as people are taking antibiotics, I pretty much have a job basically. So what drew me to this lab was this is a way for me to kind of give back to the community doing this research. Is we can figure out how is C. diff forming these spores that allow it to be more infectious, and how does it infect individuals that have already taken antibiotics? So that was one of the big pulls for the lab, is I could do some work that could directly combat this disease-causing organism. And also the lab's just really cool and fun, and Sean is a great mentor. Great to hear that. So Edwin, you're the clinician of the group. So tell me, what's your experience?
Yeah. So how did I get here? So just like her, I started research as an undergrad. So I went to Michigan State, and through one of their honors college programs, they matched me up with undergrad research. So I ended up joining a physician scientist lab where we studied small molecular inhibitors of Plasmodium falciparum heat shock protein 90. And that experience is what introduced me to this concept, this idea of a physician scientist, and the world of microbiology. And so from there, I applied to the MSTP program at WashU. I did my Ph.D. with Niraj Tolia, where I continued my parasitology work. I was a structural vaccinologist, looking at Plasmodium and Bayesian proteins. And after there, I came here to the University of Pittsburgh, where I did residency, infectious disease fellowship, and then I ended up in Matt's lab.
Wow. So how do you feel this combination of seeing patients and doing research? I'm a physician scientist, so I'm a big fan of physician scientists. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think that's probably what led me to join Matt's lab. In fellowship in internal medicine, right? Staph aureus is, a notorious pathogen, right? Like half of your consults are Staph aureus, essentially. And so that really gave me the opportunity to, jump into the translational aspect of it. So I see so many Staph aureus patients, their complications, all the cons that comes with that pathogen, and then I'm able to ask these questions as to why I'm seeing the things that we're seeing in the hospital, at the bench.
Great. So Kara, what's your experience?
Yeah, so my experience, I've always been interested in infectious disease, and my love of science actually started with reading The Hot Zone by Richard Preston about Ebola. Mm-hmm. And so infectious disease has always been the path for me. And I had opportunity to do a summer undergraduate research at UT Health in the microbiology and molecular genetics program. And I fell in love with the department, and I fell in love with the people there. And I think most importantly, I fell in love with the lab I was in. We were doing mechanisms of pathogenesis in Bacillus anthracis. So I was working with Dr. Terry Kohler. And so I think at that point, I just understood that I loved microbiology. I loved doing research. And my goal was always to focus on basic mechanisms, because it's very satisfying to get to the nitty gritty of how and why things work the way that they do. So when I finished college, I immediately applied to the UT Health program. I was accepted. And as fate would have it, I actually joined a lab that did very basic research in cell division. And so I really enjoyed that. But at the end of my PhD, I think I was looking for some mechanistic work that would be impactful in a different way, and so more translational. And it was really a lot of serendipity that led me to Cesar. And so I think we were both looking for each other at the right time. And so I joined Cesar's lab in 2020, and it's been great so far.
With COVID and everything, we enjoyed the journey. Okay, this is fantastic. You see, there's so different backgrounds. This is what I love of this field, and coming to that. So what I want you to do now is to briefly, because I know you can give a talk of 10 minutes, to talk about your project, like, elevator speech sort of thing, right? So people who are listening to you get excited about what you do. So tell me about your project and how would you excite the people who are listening to this podcast? Cheyenne, let's start with you.
All right. I'm really excited about my project because I just had like a really big event happen with it. So anyways, so as I said, our lab studies Clostridioides difficile, or C. diff, and we mainly focus on how it forms spores because it's an anaerobic pathogen. So it needs to form these spores to survive in an oxygenated environment to infect other people. So I specifically look at how these 4 genes that are called the KIP genes, they form a little operon, how they respond to bile salts in the gut to regulate sporulation and virulence of C. diff specifically. I get really excited about it.
Beautiful. Edwin, tell me about your project.
I mentioned it earlier, but our lab's pathogen of interest is Staph aureus, specifically the more virulent version, or MRSA. So we are interested in the molecular mechanisms that contribute to antibiotic tolerance, which is a phenomenon that people believe is responsible for these persistent infections that we see in our patients. Right? Patients can get MRSA infections, bacteremic, for days, 5, 10, in absence of like any obvious reason. And so, our lab has embarked on this crusade to sequence many hundreds of isolates. And we've identified evidence of within-host evolution of this protein called REL, which is the central regulator of the bacterial stringent response. And so right now I'm currently working on characterizing these REL proteins or their mutations and try to link them to mechanism of persistence and how might they let these different variants persist in our patients.
Beautiful and important work. And then last but not least, Kara, what are you working on?
So I'm working on mechanisms of daptomycin resistance in Enterococcus faecalis. And specifically, my project is focused on understanding the proteins that are in the LIA-FSR 3-component signaling system. And so my work is really dedicated to understanding these proteins at a level that hasn't been done before. And so I'm focused on doing biochemical characterization and looking at the structure of these proteins in complex with one another and how they interact with one another in order to activate the mechanism.
Beautiful. So very exciting projects. And by the way, if you want to listen to what they are doing, they're going to present in our January conference. They are going to give beautiful talks in this conference, and they're looking for a lot of interactions with the audience. So when I had the idea for this podcast, this came from somebody at ASN Microbe, actually, who approached me for, to do, why don't you do this podcast? So I thank that person who actually did this. And the next question is, I know that, it looks that it's really easy to get where you are, guys, but there are so many challenges. So I want you guys now to describe what are the challenges that we've been through in this pursuit of this status that you are right now, and how sort of what strategies work for you to overcome them, because I know that this is a difficult path, particularly where you're young, energetic, and there's many other challenges. So let's talk about the sort of negative things of this, but with a positive spin. Cheyenne, let's hear it from you first.
Yeah, so I guess one of the major challenges that I've experienced like early on and still am experiencing is really overcoming and continuing to overcome self-doubt and imposter syndrome, because I feel like that is very, very pervasive in academia in general, especially whenever you're from a disadvantaged background or an underrepresented minority background. So some people look at the work, the science work itself, and they think, wow, that is so hard. I can never learn that. I don't think I could ever figure that out. But the problem isn't really the work itself. You can always figure out the work, and you can always figure out any problems that you run into technical wise in science, because people have done it before. You can figure it out. But overcoming the mental setbacks that come with that and learning how to communicate clearly whenever you have these setbacks to your advisors and committee, it can be difficult because it feels like you're not meeting expectations. You're not meeting your own expectations, and you kind of feel like a failure, and it really sets you up for self-doubt and imposter syndrome. So it's really important to kind of set these realistic expectations for yourself and also for other people. And that is something that I've had difficulty with. So I think that other people probably have too. And I'm still working on it, but I've come a long way actually ever since I'm.
So tell me a little bit about your background. I mean, this is a fascinating statement, and I am really so glad that you mentioned this. Tell me a lot about your background.
Yeah, so I'm actually a native. I'm part native from the Ph.D. tribe of South Carolina. So I already feel very kind of out of place in general because I don't really see a lot of other natives here. Whenever I do, it's great because we run into each other and we're like, oh my gosh, hey, do you know so-and-so? I actually met one other PD native down here at Emory University, and we meet up and have coffee periodically and stuff. So having that background, being a first generation PhD student too, it makes you, like whenever I first came here, I felt like I couldn't do any of this stuff. I felt like I couldn't do any of this work. I hadn't really done a lot of like PCR reactions or anything. I had done like one before I came here, and now I do them all the time, do them regularly. But I felt like I couldn't do any of this stuff, and now I'm just doing it regularly. And they call me a senior grad student, and it seems like I know what I'm doing now, and I'm making great progress. So yeah, that's kind of
beautiful story. Excellent. Yeah. Edwin, tell me about you and the challenges of being a clinician and a researcher and other challenges that you've experienced.
Yeah, and I'm sure that you've experienced this yourself. But I think one of the biggest challenges that I had throughout the beginning of my training is just being able to balance the two worlds. At every step, when I was in med school, I did my thing, I learned, and then it was like, oh, time to jump into lab. And then so I had to like drop everything and then pick up a new set of skills. And then, at the end of grad school, you're like, oh, I got the hang of this. I'm at the top of my little part of the world. And then it's time to jump back into the clinics where, you're in last place. You forgot everything you've ever learned. And so this back and forth has been one of the hardest things professionally about this career. And that goes until today, right? Like I go to clinic half a day a week, which is just barely enough to remember how to do things. And then I have to keep on top of the literature as I'm trying to write grants. So this back and forth is one of the challenges.
Yeah, I hear you completely on this. But trust me that once you know how to ride a bike, you will always know how to ride a bike. And the time for doing science is right now. Then, your connection with the clinical world will come back and you will enjoy it so much, believe me. So, Kara, how about you?
Well, it's great that Cheyenne and Edwin went ahead because, I could talk forever about self-doubt being a huge challenge in feeling like I can't move forward. I could talk forever about balancing two worlds. So when I first started my postdoc with Cesar, I had just given birth to my first child. And so I've been sort of navigating, balancing being a parent with, the demands of science, and then, balancing all that at the same time with, sort of fighting to overcome my own lack of confidence sometimes. But I think to talk about something different, I'll talk about when I joined the lab with Cesar, we were at UT Health, and then we transitioned to Houston Methodist, and I hadn't even been in my postdoc for a year. And so there was like an 8 months downtime where we didn't have an active lab space. And that was challenging because it was hard to feel productive, but I think I overcame it by pushing myself outside of my comfort zone and exploring ways to make progress on my project in ways that I hadn't anticipated doing in my postdoc. So I did a lot of computer work. I stepped into modeling work. I stepped into in silico analyses that I was not prepared for and not anticipating. And I mean, it ended up making the period more productive for me than I thought it ever could have been. And so that transition, that really large transition that seemed like a huge roadblock, ended up being fruitful for my project. So
this is a great story. Tell us a little bit more about your experience as being a young mother, within pandemic world, and moving labs and having a baby. How was that?
Really difficult. It was easier when my daughter was an infant, believe it or not, because her needs are so basic that, I felt a little bit better being away from home a little bit longer. But now that she's a toddler, she's more cognizant of her world. She's more cognizant of her feelings. It's just about shifting priorities. And so on the days when I have an 8-hour purification protocol, that's my priority. And on days where she's got lunch at daycare with the parents, then that's where I'm at, to make sure that she has those experiences, but at the same time that I'm feeling comfortable with the progress that I'm making. So there's no way around it. It's really, really difficult. But I think if you take the perspective that at sometimes work is most important and at other times your child is most important, it doesn't have to be this fight for both things needing all of your attention all the time. And it sort of helps with the guilt of feeling like, am I missing out or am I being unproductive? You can do both, I think.
Wow, very insightful. So I just want to talk about your mentors, mentors that you have during your career. For other people to understand, what sort of mentor qualities or attributes, or in any way, do you think have has helped you during this process, and how important your mentor has been? Cheyenne, why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I feel like I've had some really great mentors throughout the years, and I'm gonna give a great shout out to Sean McBride here, because she is a fantastic mentor. And some of the major qualities that I'm going to talk specifically about her that she has is that she's not really, whenever I first came to the lab, she had like a mentor-mentee contract, so to say. And I feel like that's very important for any kind of workplace or any lab you go to. It's like, as a trainee, what do I offer the lab, and what does the lab offer me? So having those expectations laid out very clearly at the beginning was fantastic. And then also throughout my career so far, those expectations have been very clear. So very clear communication is a huge factor, I feel like. And also kind of patience. And like I had mentioned previously, realistic expectations, not just for like me as a trainee myself, but have the trainee having realistic expectations of the mentor, and the mentor having realistic expectations of the trainee as well. I feel like those are really important qualities, and the ability to really actively listen on both sides is extremely important.
Great. Edwin, how was your experience?
Yeah, I think I too have been very lucky with my mentors from undergraduate to grad school until now in Matt's lab. I think the unifying characteristic of all of them have really been that they've been very selfless in terms of providing the training. At every step, it was always they would always look out for me and what is the best way to advance my career, and what would I need to get to the next step. And I think that's been very important to help me, traverse this research world, is to have those people look out for me. Whether it's, pointing me to the right people to talk to, introducing me to new publication opportunities, networking, or new ways to, divert my projects. I think that's been a very important feature.
Okay. I know, Cara, we have a conflict here, but you're just free to say whatever you want. And your previous mentor, who played a very important role in your career.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm going to have to take a moment to brag on you. I think, honestly, though, this postdoc has really reinvigorated my attachment to science and my excitement for science. And I think part of that is this project was very risky to take on. There's no published protocols for purifying these proteins or working with them. We're literally laying the railroad tracks as we're going along. And so I think one of the things that really helped me in my postdoc through all of those challenging transitions was from the get-go, I felt like, Cesar, you trusted me. And having that trust made it very easy to take these risky leaps. And so it felt like you trusted that I knew what I was doing and that what I was doing was the right thing and that the results we were getting were going in the right direction. And I think it made me a little bit more fearless in pursuing this project and in saying, like, you know what, I am going to try to purify a membrane protein for the very first time. And I'm gonna do it well, maybe. So having that trust was, I think, very important for me feeling like the project was in my hands. But if there was ever a problem, it wasn't like I was fighting to prove myself all the time.
Beautiful. Great. The next thing that I want you to do is, so you are in different stages of your careers right now, right? So what are your sort of short-term dreams and your long-term dreams? Again, we can talk all day about this, but without a glass of wine, I probably won't survive that. But let's talk about your dreams, long-term, and how you are thinking that you are going to pursue them. Cheyenne.
Yeah, so you mentioned short-term and long-term. So short-term goals, I'd like to get my Ph.D. That'd be great. So I mentioned earlier that I had a big event just happen with my thesis. So I just got a foundational mutant. I finally made a full mutant of my opera, and I'm so excited about it. So I have to say that. So my short-term goals are so
I know the feeling.
I'm so happy. I finally got that. So it's been a month and a half of me trying to get it. But so short-term goals are to continue that project and to figure out what all these genes are doing in C. diff. So I would love to do that. Long-term goals, I know this is going to sound kind of crazy, and I have a hard time seeing myself being this in the future, but I'd like to be a PI, I think. I really like academia. I like going to conferences. I like thinking about these problems in science, and I like mentoring students. And actually, I see a lot of systemic difficulties in academia that don't really need to be there. And I really like advocating for DEI in academia as well. So whenever I see problems in the system, I know getting out of academia is not how I can fix those problems. So if I can stay in academia and pursue a postdoc and potentially become a principal investigator in my own lab, I can work to fix some of these systemic difficulties and problems that I'm seeing. So that's kind of my long-term kind of dream thing. I know it's difficult, but there's a lot of us working on it. So
I am a bit shocked when you say that this is, when you say this is going to sound crazy. I thought you were going to say, well, I'm going to go to Mars and do microbiology there. But you actually say becoming a PI is a crazy thing.
Yeah,
so why do you say that?
Because a lot of grad students nowadays, there's this fear of becoming PIs. Everybody wants to go to industry or leave academia because there's so much pressure, not just on students and academics in general, like postdocs, but PIs in the field have a lot of pressure on them too. And there's a lot of systemic imbalance going on. So you almost have to take a really noble cause up to, it feels like, at least as a grad student, to say, I'm going to go be a PI and run my own lab. It's something that people are very afraid to do, really, because they see their advisors doing it and they're like, wow, how do they still have all their hair if they do have it all still, Yeah. So it's kind of like that.
But this is a very important, thank you very much for saying that. Thank you very much, because this is the reason we are in a crisis. We need people like you to stay in science, to stay in academic and make all these discoveries that is going to change the world. And there are so many factors that influence the decisions, that goes from the fact that, funding is complicated, trying to succeed on that, all the academic pressure that you mentioned. That's something that we all need to work on together, right? Edwin, your experience for your goals, future goals.
Yeah, so I'm still currently pursuing my original dream from many years ago of becoming a physician scientist in academia. I think my short term goal is to is craft together a KO8, have that funded hopefully, and then down the road, hopefully an RO1. And just to echo what Cheyenne's saying, right, there's a lot of challenges and roadblocks that we see all of our mentors go through, and it can be daunting at times.
Yeah, the funding route is a bottleneck that we are asking our physician scientists to get to that point. Most sites may not even support that unless you have a K. They won't hire you. And then is the time where people want to have family, where you are coming back from a lot of debt, so you become a fellow forever. So yeah, it is a really hard pathway. So from the bottom of my heart, I'm thanking you to take that road, because we are here to try to make a difference. Kara, how about you?
So in the short term, I'm really enamored with my research project right now, and it will be very exciting if we can push it to where we want to go. And so my short-term goal is to keep working on that and to see it published and to get to share that with the research world, because I feel a lot of ownership over it. It's my second child at the moment. And then my long-term goal, kind of like Cheyenne was saying, I really enjoy doing research in this field, and I really enjoy the research in my project, and I can see the 10-year pathway of what comes out of this research project. And so my goal right now is to continue pursuing that, and I think to take it in a career in academia. And so that would also include writing a research grant or a career grant at the end of my fellowship. And then more recently, I've been tutoring high school and undergraduate students. And so I think I'm coming around on the idea of potentially being a professor somewhere. So at first that was not for me, but I think the more that I tutor the students, the more I understand why people get some satisfaction from teaching.
Yeah. Very true. Very true. That's something that really changed people's lives and history sometimes. So the last question I have for you guys that I want to respond is imagine you have somebody behind you, young and with this mind open. So what sort of advice would you give? Looking back on your journey, even if it's long or short, mainly things that you should not do. Mistakes that you made that you probably would have done better. So what kind of advice would you give to these people? As usual, Cheyenne, you are the first one.
All right. So one of the major mistakes that I made early on, and this is, it depends on if you want to call it a mistake or not. For me, whenever I was leaving undergrad, I genuinely wasn't sure if I wanted to go do a Ph.D. because I was still kind of scared of it. I wasn't sure if that was the right path for me, even though I had done years of undergrad research and everything. So I only applied to like 3 programs really. And I was lucky enough I got into 3 of 5 of them that I had applied to. And I was lucky that I got into Emory because I was like, whoa, wow, this is great. But really, you need to be applying to it. Like 5 is the minimum. Apply to at least 10. If you know you want to go do a PhD, go apply to more. Don't sell yourself short, because that was a mistake that I've done and that I still do. So don't sell yourself short. You can do this stuff for sure. For undergrads, I wanted to say specifically, go do these research experiences and put your all into it. See if you really enjoy it. See if you really like it. And then for junior grad students that may be listening, I wanted to say, make sure that your expectations for yourself are realistic, because it's a lot different from undergrad. And the things that got you through undergrad, you're not being graded like on a grade system anymore. You are just in your career now. You're building yourself as a scientist. So set those realistic expectations for yourself and don't be a perfectionist, because that's another big mistake. Do not be a perfectionist. You are going to make mistakes. You are going to quote unquote fail, but really you can just bounce back up and do what you got to do.
I love what you're saying. Edwin.
Yeah, I think the one of the biggest recommendations would be to don't be afraid to ask for help. I think that, don't be afraid to reach out for mentors or people who have actually gone in this path ahead of you, because it's really impossible and really not expected of you to do all this alone, and that any challenges that you're experiencing, there's no doubt, guaranteed that other people have gone through it before. So ask for help. There's a lot of great advice out there, and just don't be afraid to reach out.
Yeah, I think that's something in my own journey as a physician scientist. One of the things that I've struggled with is the compartmentalization that people think I am. So if I am the lab, they think that I suck as a doctor. But when they see me in front of a patient, say, "Well, how come? You're supposed to be a scientist." And I think the best clinicians I know, they are physician scientists. But people tend to undermine, of course, the fact that we are not in touch with patients 100% and 24/7. But sometimes your expertise, experience allows you to do that. And is your clinical judgment, which eventually is what grows in you and makes you a good doctor. That's an interesting, and program directors, and sometimes when people are going to hire you, they also try to compartmentalize you in those two realms. And I think it's important for you guys to understand that you have this holistic, what I call bilingual ability to look at the science and look at the patient and be able to connect those. So great. Kara, how about you?
So when I think back on the moments that maybe make me cringe the most in my journey, there was usually an issue there with either my communication or my preparation. And some of the moments that I've been most proud of in my career have been moments where I've really shined at communication. And those are skills that anyone can use in any field at any time. And so believe me when I say I am a bad procrastinator. I think a lot of us are, but preparation, truly, nothing makes you feel more in ownership of your project and ownership of the tasks that you're taking than preparation. So even if it was forcing myself to work on something for 10 minutes at a time, if I didn't wait until the last minute and sort of feel like I skirted by, the moments where I felt the most pride in my work were when I prepared. And then on communication, I think I helped myself stand out as a fellow in my application because I worked really hard on how to communicate my science in a way that was understanding and that was engaging. And so every conference I go to, every seminar I go to, I think about, am I bored? Why? Or am I engaged? And why? What is the speaker doing that's pulling me in? If I'm outside of my field, am I following along or am I totally lost? And how can I prevent that for people whenever I speak? Because nothing gets under my skin more than watching people's eyes glaze over as you talk to them and they actively lose interest in what you're saying. Nothing makes me feel smaller. And so I've really worked really hard to hone those skills. And like I said, I think they've paid off very well.
Great. So this has been a wonderful conversation. I want to ask specifically Kara and Cheyenne. We are in a really making a lot of progress into equality, so gender equality and others. So what do you think is the status of that, you as women in science, and what do you think can be done better to move forward? Cheyenne, what do you think?
Yeah, so I know that at least from my perspective right now, we've got quite a few women faculty or people who identify as women as faculty in my program and here at Emory. So that's been really great for me. I feel like things are moving in a really good direction as far as that goes. Actually, I feel like some of the grad programs are actually a little low on having people who identify as men in their programs now at this point. So it's kind of going the other way a little bit in those regards. But overall, I think things are starting to things are definitely getting better, but I do know that at a lot of faculty searches that I haven't really been directly involved in, but I've been asked for my opinions on some of these too, as kind of like a grad student rep again. But it's still hard to find diverse people in general. So not just women, but different people of color as well, because kind of what I mentioned earlier about kind of the difficulties in academia and keeping people like us in the field, because there's this sort of like, it sort of picks for these type A personalities, usually that men end up having, that very masculine kind of dominating personality. So working on kind of, I guess, changing some of the pressures in academia could help with that more, if that makes sense. I hope it made sense with all that.
Sure. Carol, your last word.
So I think that women sharing their stories publicly has helped not only women together collectively feel like we're all having the same experience, we're all having the same struggles, and therefore we can sort of lean on each other when we encounter those problems. But I think more importantly for moving forward, I think it's got a lot of value educating younger faculty. And so when I was in my PhD program, I saw a lot of effort and a lot of follow through from male faculty who were becoming more aware of the experiences that female graduate students can have and doing more in their position to protect those students or to back them or to do whatever they needed to do to support those students. And so I think you'll always run into people who have a bad attitude or don't want to change their ways. But I think the more that women have spoken about their experience, the more that the people who want to help have become aware of how they can help.
Well, this was wonderful conversation. I really thank you. And again, I invite all our listeners that they are going to give these wonderful talks in our conference in January 18 to 20 in Houston, Texas. I just love all these conversations. I think, thank you again for the person who suggested this podcast. I hope that all the trainees and younger generation get inspired by these young people. And I want to thank everybody for your participation. This is Cesar Arias, Editor-in-Chief of AAC, signing off.